Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar on remote working and the opportunity for inclusion. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Gemma McCall and I'm co-founder and CEO of Culture Shift, the Tech for Good organisation behind the development of the report and support system. At Culture Shift, we imagine a future world of work and study that is safe, happy and supportive for everyone everywhere. Our products empower organisations to tackle harassment, bullying and unacceptable behaviour of all kinds, allowing leaders to activate positive change in their organisations and maintain the culture they want. Earlier this year, we conducted some research with 1,000 employees who were previously office-based but had made the move to remote working. The findings highlighted the different factors that are most important to wellbeing at work, and we discovered that certain groups are benefiting much more from home working. For example, a much higher percentages of women than men have noticed a positive shift in work-life balance, and disabled individuals have a greater quality of work life when working from home than abled respondents. As businesses continue navigating the pandemic and conversations around the future of workplace culture take precedence, we're proud to host this conversation about remote working and the opportunity it presents to be radically inclusive. During today's discussion, we will talk about how you can ensure you're maximising diversity and inclusion whilst building your culture and supporting your people. I'm delighted to be joined today by three panellists who all have so much amazing insight to add to this discussion. Firstly, Rachel Morgan Trimmer is a highly experienced public speaker, consultant and business coach, which she delivers through her own business, Sparkle Class. She delivers powerful talks and engaging workshops on all aspects of neurodiversity, which includes ADHD, autism, dyslexia and dyspraxia. She draws on her own experience of having ADHD and autism to help people understand why neurodiversity is important and the impact it has on mental health. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for joining us. Secondly, Layla Okai is a mental health and wellbeing expert, keynote speaker, facilitator, coach and cultural awareness specialist. She's the CEO and director of Diverse Minds UK, helping to create equal, happy and mentally healthy workplaces through training, coaching and consultancy. She has over 16 years experience in leading, developing, delivering and managing diversity, inclusion and equality practices and has been responsible for embedding culture change in the world's top universities. Hi, Layla.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. It's really great to be here alongside the other phenomenal speakers.
And last but absolutely by no means least is Janice Sutherland. Janice is an award-winning women's leadership expert with over 25 years of senior leadership corporate experience and was one of the first female CEOs in the Caribbean. She's CEO of Sutherland Coaching and Consulting, founder of This Woman Can, and chairperson of the Caribbean Women in Leadership. She's particularly passionate about seeing women succeed, and through This Woman Can, she's developing female leaders to achieve peak performance. Hi, Janice.
Hi, Gemma. Hi to all the panellists. Thanks for having me this morning.
So, if we get started, my first question is, do we all think that remote working can actually be an opportunity for inclusion? And I'll go to Rachel first.
Thank you. Yeah, I think what's been interesting about the sudden shift to remote working now is that people didn't have a choice, because for so long, people have been talking about inclusion in different ways and remote working and flexible working. They're sort of humming and hawing and going, is it going to make a difference? Is everyone going to slack off at home? And so on. And suddenly, employers, their hand was forced and they had to let people work from home because they didn't have a choice. So I think that's been really interesting, because it's been that big shift that we, I wouldn't say needed exactly, but it's been a big push forward in terms of inclusion, and also sort of opening up the conversation around work and how we work and how we can work better. I went to, a while ago, obviously long before lockdown, I went to a chocolate factory in York, And I was booted to the back because I think they thought I was going to eat all the chocolate, which I would have done. And in the back, I found a book by Herbert Beerbohm Rowntree, who was he ran the chocolate factories in York a long time ago, and he was a great pioneer in working practices. He was one of the first people to assign jobs according to skills. So he'd do tests about how people sorted things, for example, and if they were really good at sorting things, they would be the ones putting the chocolates into the boxes. And I was having a look at in his book, and I was thinking some of this advice is really good, but we haven't taken it on board yet. And this book was written 100 years ago. So I think that shows the pace, that how slow things can change. So I think one of the outcomes of this pandemic, which I'm not saying it's, there's been a lot of difficulty for a lot of people, and I don't want to diminish that, but I think one of the things that has happened with this is that it's caused this change to move much quicker, which I think has been really interesting.
Yeah, I definitely agree that a lot of it's funny that it was often like, oh, someone's working from home today, are they? It's their sort of shirking day. And I was actually talking to a colleague the other day who said that even though it's been really positive that we've proven that we can work from home successfully and still be connected and everything, it's also changed those days where we did have the opportunity to work from home and get our head down, because we are all, everyone knows how to jump on a Zoom call or whatever now and will do it. So that opportunity to kind of lock yourself away, get your head down and get some writing done, or, plough through a project will also be impacted, I think, in the future, which isn't also necessarily a positive thing. Layla, I don't know whether you have anything to build on that.
I do think it's an opportunity for inclusion. I think it's been a bit of a mixed bag, though, hasn't it, for people? So if we think about I think employers where they've enabled their staff to order equipment, have ergonomic, sent out the right information, because I think a lot of people are really struggling with that. I was working with an organisation where they had done that, but people were still struggling. So where there's shared, housemates, and they're all using the kitchen table or the dining room table, and one of this person's colleagues was on sales calls all the time, and it just, how did he concentrate? He did programming. So there's that to think about. I also think one of the other areas is around domestic, given that it's the 16 days of action, and you'll be very aware of this, around sexual and domestic violence and kind of what's happening, how are these things raised, and if people are living in extended families, yes, it's great if people want the opportunity to work from home more, because I completely hear your point, Rachel. I think it's an opportunity, but I think these things need to be thought about quite carefully as to how we have a blended approach when we do eventually go back some way, somehow, into a physical work environment. I think it has been really positive for many people who identify as being on the neurodivergent spectrum. Absolutely, it can be. I think for others, though, if they've got their equipment or their way of working in the office, and then to just be told, right, that's it, you're at home, I think it's absolutely possible for it to be an inclusive workplace. But what about the transition? What about the conversations? What about how that equipment and their working environment will need to shift so that it's just as inclusive as it was in the workplace?
Yeah, definitely. Janice, I don't know whether you've got any sort of thing to add, particularly based on...
I'm agreeing with both Layla and Rachel, but I think there's another benefit that's been overlooked from a leadership perspective, in that as leaders, we've also had to change our styles. We've had to bring a different mindset. We've had to be far more vulnerable, which is good because it shows another side of us, because leaders are also going through some of the same challenge themselves. And I think once they open up their mind, it's also opened up the employment pool. That they can go, and there's a lot more diverse, a far greater range of persons they found they would have had otherwise. But as I said, the thing for me, the biggest thing is that change in mindset, that a person doesn't have to be sitting in front of me to think they're working, but how do I accommodate that they can work comfortably from home and let go build more trust in my team.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting challenge, and I don't know whether the answers would sort of, or the research would change a bit, because we did it, we conducted it kind of over the summer, And since then, the Fawcett Society in particular has talked about how actually the demand on women as generally the main caregivers, either child caregivers or caring for parents, actually there's a significant burden on them to try and balance all of that as well. And because they're now at home, rather than kind of going and leaving and going to the office and being kind of out of the home environment, whether that's actually had a more negative impact, as I guess, as this goes on and as the pandemic continues and as lockdowns continue to be the way that, you know, the UK government seem to be, you know, dealing with it. I think it's really interesting as leaders, as you say, and as leaders of businesses, to make sure that that women aren't overburdened with work and caregiving responsibilities. Rachel, can you just talk about maybe some of the what some of the biggest challenges are for neurodiverse people entering a typical workplace, and what ways, if any, does home working actually help to overcome these?
Well, one of the biggest challenges that neurodiverse people have in the workplace is actually getting hired in the first place, because a lot of people are excluded from traditional hiring processes because they don't communicate the same way as anybody, you know, everybody else, or they have challenges with their reading and writing, or they have anxiety and so on. So some of the ways we're working now can actually be helpful, because you haven't got a face-to-face interview, you haven't got to go into town, you haven't got to use public transport or get in the car. So for a lot of neurodiverse people, that and also people with mental health issues as well, actually, that can reduce a lot of anxiety. And I think that the benefits as well of doing that actually extend to other groups as well. I mean, you mentioned women, and in particular working mothers. Again, we are very time pressed at the moment, and I think some of those things can just ease a bit of anxiety, because if you don't have that commuting time or the interviewing time or whatever, then you've got a little bit more time to sort out all the other stuff you need. So it kind of is reducing stress. I think in terms of what I personally have seen lately is that a lot more people are talking about inclusion now. Mm-hmm. Which has been really interesting, because at the start of lockdown, I thought, you know, because a lot of my business is around public speaking and about training, and I thought, we're not going to be doing any more stuff. And actually the reverse has happened, because obviously more people can join from different places, and there just seems to be a lot more conversation around it now. I think it's moved the conversation, you know, to the forefront of a lot of people's minds, not just with neurodiverse inclusion where I work, but with a lot of different kinds of inclusion as well.
And do you feel that those conversations do you feel that people are able to realise what they have done before to be sort of not inclusive? And do you think that they are understanding much more about how to be inclusive? Or do you think people are still sort of grappling with how to do that?
I think there's a little bit of a mix, because I know that neurodiversity is not on the agenda for 9 out of 10 organisations still. And I think that right now it's something that people are starting to learn about, and obviously learning about it is the first step in actually doing something about it, because you know, people are saying, I didn't realise not having neurodiverse people in our organisation was a problem, or not having inclusive hiring practices was a problem, and now they're realising that it is, and now obviously it's something that they can do something about.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a hugely positive thing. Janice, our research found that imposter syndrome and self-doubt are very much felt more by people when home working than it was previously. Like, I have raging imposter syndrome all the time, so I don't know whether it's more or less during the home working. I think it's just constant. In what ways would you empower people, particularly women, to believe in themselves and continue putting themselves out there?
think the first thing from a women's perspective, you talked about working parents, is that we've already thought, we sometimes spend so much time trying to be seen as no different to our colleagues having the children. We almost, hide them in a corner sometimes, that they don't exist. But when you're at home, we've all seen the funny memes with children bursting into meetings. But, this is reality. So I think we almost have to accept that this is our reality, communicate what that reality is, and start setting ourselves expect the organization wants. More often, they just want the job done. It doesn't always have to be, sitting robust at your desk, your head down from a 9 to 5 perspective. Stopping the comparisonitis is a huge one. How's my colleague managing with this? Well, it's different circumstances. And I would say communication I've touched on, so that's really key. One of the things I have a challenge with, I do a lot of virtual work, is that women often block out their camera. And I think it's because of an expectation that I need to be fully made up. I need to look 100% perfect. But I think we're missing out on so much, the things, what our face tells, the communication. It's very difficult to communicate sometimes when you don't have that visual. So I'd say, all I put on is a bit of lippy, bit of powder, that's it. You don't need to come like you're going to the dance. It doesn't have to be that way. And then lastly, I would say, stop listening to voices in your head. They are rampant, so stop listening to those voices and believe in yourself and your talent, because what got you there, was you. So you find strategies that work for you and remind yourself that you're your own worst critic. That's probably the strategies I'd give it. A quick snippet.
Yeah, I think that's really, really useful, definitely. Layla, with remote working being the norm at the moment, it feels like there is a real opportunity to attract talent into a business, because now there are no geographical boundaries necessarily. Do you think employers should see this as a chance to also be more diverse and inclusive? And how do you think that is best achieved?
Yeah, really interesting question, Gemma. And one organisation I've been working with has done this actually. So they're located in quite a monocultural area in England, and they had a particular profile. And they also do a bit of mixture. They do tech work, they do policy work, they do data analysis. So for the tech team is growing, and they were really concerned that they were going to see a big disparity in gender pay, because it tends to be men. So they thought, wait a second, it doesn't have to be like this. Let's think about how we can do this. And they started advertising, or they started using different advertising strategies. And because of lockdown and because of home working, they've actually managed to gain a lot of people from city areas, which they wouldn't normally have, because they don't need to come into this location. Which I think is interesting. Equally, I think there does need to be a balance, because I don't know, some of you might have seen this when local news and, the horrible reality about redundancies, and people saying, well, now I would be competing with maybe 40 people in my area. I'm competing with the whole of the UK or the whole of England or Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland. And it's become really, really tough. So I think it's about thinking about that balance, yes, to get the diversity profile up. But of course, diversity is not just about geographics. It's not just about, racial diversity. It's about disability, it's about the kind of socioeconomic background as well. So I'm thinking, in areas where it is not as affluent, or there aren't as many opportunities as there are in bigger cities like Manchester, Leeds, Liverpool, London, etc. How can you get that balance, and also supporting the local area, as well as thinking about what's the talent we want to attract in. So I think it's about being mindful about that whole picture. Now, I know we don't live in fairy world, but I think it is important to think about that, because you can do that. Or you could think about, which jobs might we want to have more of a locally recruiting focus on, not precluding people, but that we could adjust, and which things do we think actually we need to go wider than this, because we need to look at talent slightly differently, or we need to have a slightly different strategy for this.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Rachel, whilst we are still remote working, employers are having to think of more innovative ways to keep up communication with their team. That's something that I'm definitely struggling with, now that we're a few months in. We spend so much time, in front of our screens. So to get everyone on another Zoom call so that we can all have a bit of a chat, it kind of feels like it's not necessarily what everyone actually wants to do. Neurological differences can present different challenges with communication. What things should employers bear in mind, do you think? And do you have any tips for how employers can communicate better with all different types of people within their organisation?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you say all different kinds of people in the organisation, not just the neurodiverse people, because what people like me are always told is you're doing it wrong. Autistic people are told you have an issue with communication, you have an issue with social communication, but communication is always a two-way street. So it's not just me. If there's a communication issue, it's not just me, it's me and more than one person. So I think being aware of all the different kinds of communication is really important. Dyslexia is another example, because a lot of dyslexic people don't spell very well just because they're not able to. And again, it's something that people criticize a lot. But you know, if a dyslexic spells something wrong, or they spell phonetically, which some of them do, you can still read it. You don't need to go criticizing them if you can understand them. And I think so that the being aware is really important. And also, Layla, you mentioned putting those things in place that help people. So for a dyslexic, screen reading software is really useful. So they don't have to read with their eyes. They can listen to the words instead. That's really handy. And being mindful as well, or learning and understanding, and then remembering what kinds of things are challenging for people. So some people with dyslexia and other learning difficulties have trouble with Slack, not just because they can't read very well, but they can't follow a thread. And I've seen that on some social media where people reply to the wrong person, or they misunderstand because they can't read the thread. So that's one of the things. And for autistic people, the classic is we find Zoom really hard, because we can't read faces very well, we can't read body language very well, we've got a lot less to go on. And I don't know if you noticed, right at the beginning of this panel, I wasn't talking at all, because I can't. I've only ever spoken since we started when you've asked me a specific, concise, easy to understand question. And I've said this before, if I've been in a meeting and people go, Rachel, what are your thoughts? And I'm thinking, you know, the joiners are coming to do my skirting boards tomorrow. And they're going, no, I mean about inclusion. You know, so I think it's being aware of those things and offering that support. And also when you offer the support, it's good to remember that some people don't want to be singled out, especially if they've got a sort of an emotional issue with their needs. So you offer those sorts of support to everybody. And I think asking for suggestions can be really helpful as well. And I personally have found that useful, because a lot of times people say to me, what do you need? What do you need for this panel? Or what do you need for this course? Or what do you need? And I don't know, because I don't know how it's going to turn out. I don't actually know what I need. So if somebody says to me, is this going to help you? Would it help you to send the questions in advance, for example, like for this panel? I say, actually, yeah, that would be helpful. Or if somebody's got to send you something in the post, and post gives you anxiety because of, you know, you've been asked, you've had bills you couldn't pay, for example, and say, I'm going to send you something in the post. Would it help if I draw something on it so you know it's from me? Oh yeah, that would be helpful. So I think when you're talking about communication, we're talking about all different kinds of communication. And I think the key thing is learning and understanding from each other.
Definitely. I think that's so interesting. Like, those things that you've mentioned as well, they are not things that are expensive for employers to implement or take a whole heap of training to. It's you know, they're quite straightforward things to be able to implement that can just have such a positive impact on someone, can't they? You know, like really, instead of the anxiety of something hitting the you know, the what's the word, the tray, you know, into when it's posted through the letterbox, and the anxiety of if and when that will happen and what it'll look like and will I open the wrong thing, you know, it just takes all of that away, doesn't it? Which is, you know, just massively, you know, freeing, not only in that moment where someone needs to open that letter, but for a whole day or 2 days of waiting for the post to arrive and not actually being able to focus on your work because you're so worried about whether that letter's going to arrive or not. You know, it just has a really, you know, transformational impact, which is something that didn't take you much to do, but will really have a positive impact on the other side. I think that's really interesting, and something that we do at Culture Shift, which is probably, I don't know whether it's necessarily something that everyone wants to do, but it's definitely really helpful when, you know, just trying to find out how best to work with one another. One of my colleagues, when she joined the business, Vimla Apadu, she introduced her user manual, which is basically a set of questions that kind of helps you understand how Vim likes to work. And it's things like, I'd like to be communicated to in this way, I don't like to be communicated to in that way. This sort of thing, you know, causes me anxiety. This kind of thing makes me really happy. And a few of our colleagues at Culture Shift have filled out those user manuals, and I've struggled to do one because I feel like I don't know myself well enough, weirdly, to be able to say this is how I like to be communicated with. But one of my colleagues, for example, well, actually quite a few of them, have a huge amount of anxiety in being late to a meeting. So they will always be 15 minutes early, whether it's a important meeting or not. They like to be in front of their computer screen and be sat sort of ready and waiting for the Zoom call to start. I will always be like 2 minutes in, like, hi, I'm really sorry I'm late. And that doesn't, for me, it doesn't, I'm just one of life's late, so I really struggle with time management. But knowing that they hate that is really helpful for me to understand, because I can try and do my best to change my behavior so that I'm bringing the best out in those colleagues. So laying it out as honestly as we have at Culture Shift might not be for everyone, but it has definitely had a really positive impact in understanding how people respond to different things. It has been, and I'm happy to maybe share it with people after this, after the webinar, to show what questions we ask, just because instead of making the mistakes maybe and finding out the hard way that someone doesn't like working in that way, it just sort of circumvents that a bit. Janice, you're really committed to helping women develop and succeed in their workplaces. What have been some of the biggest challenges for the women that you're coaching during this time of remote working, and how have you helped them to overcome them?
Oh, the challenges. Great question. I think I've seen 3 core areas where women have found some challenges. One is seeing the opportunity in the situation. And I think overall the piece, I think a lot of organizations and individuals alike have struggled to realize, to change their mindset from a woe is me to actually there's opportunity here, I just need to find it. The second thing is being prepared to adapt to a very fluid situation. One of the things I coach leaders is having, I call it strategic fluidity, because whatever you planned to do last week may not be the same the next day or even the next week. So can you switch your mind to adapt to that? And then the last thing was women doubting that they can adapt and building their resiliency. So it's a very strange combination. Not all the things come at one time. But what I tell women is, first of all, the skill sets you need now to lead in this world are the skill sets women have. The vulnerability, the compassion, the listening, all those skill sets. This is now a positive for us. When they told you were too soft or too emotional, people want to see a bit of emotion because they want to feel you're connected with them now. So it's an absolutely fabulous time for women to really get ahead. So we want to embrace that vulnerability and be strong. So the few solutions I tell women is physical well-being. It's a sometimes oft overused mantra, but it works. So exercise, sleep, fresh air, Make it part of your daily routine. Know your support network. Who do you need around you? Who can you go for a cry? Who can you talk to? And the great thing is now, it doesn't have to be the person next to you. It's global, so you can find, I've got a little hashtag 2020 friends, people I've connected with over this year that I've really found firm friends we've got a connection with, that I can turn to when I need help. Cognitive flexibility, so again, accepting the change and not fixing yourself to one solution, because you start to get stuck when you can't see another way out. Your coping strategies, how do you, when it gets a bit too much, you feel overwhelmed, what can you do? My favoritist one, and I'm going to use that word, favoritist, is a MacGyver mindset. And by that, I'm an old school MacGyver girl. Yes, I'm that old. But the MacGyver mindset really is, find the solution. It doesn't matter how ugly it looks. Your goal is the solution. Does it fix the problem you're trying to solve? Doesn't have to be pretty. But once you adopt that, it's fantastic. And I said it before, lastly, trust yourself. Trust who you are, because you got where you are because of who you are. So that's just some of the things, some of the things I share with them. Like I said, very quick.
I like that idea of the things not being, not waiting for it to be absolutely perfect, but just like getting it out there and then and building on it. And that's something that I've really realized, kind of making the shift from like to a tech startup, that in tech, it's that agile way of working is like, get it out there and then iterate on it, because if we wait until it's perfect, well, it'll never be perfect, basically. So you'll never get it out. So get it out and then build and build and build and build and build, because it doesn't just have to be this like absolute thing of perfection, and even when you think it is that thing of perfection, it's not. Someone's gonna,
subjective.
Yeah, exactly. So there's just no point in waiting for that perfect moment. You'll just be, what is it? It's I can't remember what the phrase is, but it's something like, perfection paralysis or something like that, where, you're just, it stops you from doing something because you're waiting for that perfect time.
Just procrastination. That's all it is.
I saw a really interesting meme as well, actually, about like why people do procrastinate, and it's not necessarily because you're a procrastinator and that's just you. It's all of the things that actually, for that confidence, or because of anxiety, or there's a lot actually that
so much
that means that you're overthinking, and all of that stuff is stopping you from getting started. So it's stopping doing that, isn't it?
and then some.
Yeah. Layla, when we're thinking about being more diverse and inclusive, employers often rush into training as the first step. Your recent podcast, you said that this isn't necessarily right. What do you think is a more considered approach?
Yeah, well, thank you for listening to the podcast. Yeah, so my last episode was all about why training isn't a panacea. So I'm not saying training isn't important. Rachel has talked about this, Janice has talked about this. I'm not saying you throw it in the bin, but I think it shouldn't be a knee-jerk reaction. It needs to be an ongoing thing. So it shouldn't be that maybe a staff member who's identifies as neurodivergent, and they've been struggling and they've been having friction with their line manager because there isn't that positive communication that Janice mentioned. Right, quick, we've got to train everyone. Oh my God, it's neurodiversity is the flavor of the month. And I think it should be much more about, okay, so we want to look at neurodivergence and neurodiversity in its entirety. What does that mean to our organization? What kind of training do we need? What might that look like? We're not going to be together, so we need to think about bite size. What do we want people to take away? And I think it's that planned process around it. And actually that this isn't a bolt-on. So it needs to be integrated into everything. So if we're thinking about health and safety, which we need to, thinking about the different aspects around diversity, equality and inclusion. So, who can access this information? How are they accessing it? Is it accessible? Are we thinking about maybe we don't have any wheelchair users, or maybe we don't have anyone with a visual or sensory impairments right now, but if we did, how would they be able to do what we're trying to do, or this element of health and safety, for example? Another example for me is, employee assistance programs, brilliant, but do we have we had that conversation with our employee assistance program about culturally competent and counsellors who are trained in different cultural methodologies and models? If we've got Black members of staff, and this has happened, who have really suffered seeing footage, seeing this particular wave of Black Lives Matter, but we know that Black Lives Matter is 600 plus years old, disgustingly. So what's happening? It's not about saying, oh, it's just in your head, it's just your perception. And I'm not saying that's what counsellors and therapists do, but I'm saying, you need that connection so someone can really understand, and the different type of therapeutic models available. Equally, there's certain things that women will go through biologically, so childbirth, and if someone is struggling with either postnatal depression or postnatal mania, or actually if they're the main caregiver, male, female, non-binary, what support is there? And thinking about that if you've got staff who are transitioning. So this just needs to be integrated into absolutely everything, and not a bolt-on. And I think it can be done easily, because I think if you've got leadership training, you can do that. I think if you've got tech training, you can do that. It's everyone's responsibility.
Definitely, and what I would say about training is that that employers shouldn't underestimate, especially when you're talking about things such as white fragility and allyship and things like that. Is we've experienced this recently at Culture Shift. You go, right, okay, I'm going to do an allyship training course, because we want to understand how to be a good ally. And the feelings that brought up across everyone within the organization, and being able to have the conversations with all of the different people on all of the different paths and sort of bits of the journey that they are on, I think I, as a leader, underestimated that, because people are on different parts of the journey and do have massively different lived experiences, all from, not understanding my white privilege and all of a sudden understanding it, the massive wake up call that is, to people of color in the organization who are like, yeah, this is literally every day of my life I experience at least one thing. And sort of training is a really positive thing, but you definitely have to have the kind of, it's not just that couple of hours where you can go, right, brilliant, be an ally, see you later.
Yeah,
First of all, allyship is an ongoing learning process. And secondly, understand that training is going to have an impact and implications, and kind of put the conversation points in place afterwards for people to continue those conversations.
I think that's it. And I think with everything that we see going on again, it's trending again, isn't it, today? Laurence Fox. And and we might have our own opinions about it, but then we have staff and teams who might very resonate with what he says. So also to think about, if we force people into this and make everything mandatory, now there's certain things that do need to be mandatory, but how do we do that so that, when you talk about white privilege, people get very angry and upset because they think that you're saying they've never had any hardship in their life. And no, that's not what we're saying. But actually, let's start by talking about what privileges do we have working here, and then building that conversation. So you're still doing it, but it's not, right, let's react, everyone in a room, let's talk about this. Well, if you don't like it, then you've just got to crack on. And it's difficult. Some of these things feel very difficult, because I think British culture is very much, oh, let's not be rude, let's not talk about things, let's not talk about disability, let's not talk about that. And I think as a result, it's made things far worse. So, by not talking about things that we find uncomfortable, icky and tricky, it doesn't help. So we have to do it, but do it in a way that's appropriate at an individual, team and organizational level.
Yeah, definitely. And that can be challenging for employers who you know, definitely want to do the right thing, but don't know how to do it. And I think it sort of comes back to that perfection thing again, where, you know, as long as you're not doing anything, you know, like overtly harmful, kind of start with something instead of not doing anything and waiting. Start with something and build upon it, and sort of continue the conversations and the training and the learning, but realize that it's not just going to be a 2-day workshop and then you'll be done. I think that's definitely what we've also got to start to realize. I'm going to open the chat for questions in a moment. So please either use the Q&A or use the chat function to put your questions to the panelists, and then I'll ask them. Before we move to audience questions, what do each of you think is the single biggest opportunity for employers right now to be more inclusive, and why should and how can they take advantage of that? And I'll come to Janice first.
Can't you see me thinking?
Sorry, you were like sort of nodding away.
No,
So
I'm thinking, okay, I think the biggest opportunity, as I said earlier, was just to basically open your mindset, open your mind to that you have a bigger pool to work from. You have a bigger pool to work from before now, and whatever and I know it's very difficult and it's not training, your bias, to overcome your biases, because what you thought was a challenge before is actually an opportunity. So how can you look past your biases, how you thought things should work or how things work? We're in a new world now, you know, and the things you told yourself couldn't be done, not just yourself, you've probably disproved it, and so have many other organizations as well. So if you don't know the answer, go and find it. Do not sit there thinking, oh, I don't know what to do next. You're there for a reason. You know, you're the leader, you're in charge. Go and find the solution. I always tell leaders, you do not need to know every single answer, but what you do need to know is to know where to go to find it. And I think that's the biggest opportunity.
Or at least not be scared to search for it.
Oh yeah, don't be scared.
There's
Yeah.
like a lot of arrogance, isn't there, in the sort of within leaders, that, you know, that kind of arrogance of not wanting to look under a few rocks to try and find
that 3-letter word, ask, ASK. You know, it is so debilitating, because I think, you know, you believe you should know it. Well, no, I don't believe you should know it, but I do believe you should know where to go to get the answer.
Yeah, and it's kind of, that goes to what you were saying before about building that kind of, you know, that friends, 2020 friends, that sort of that trusted group of people who aren't gonna, you don't feel will belittle you for asking those questions
at all.
Definitely. I'm going to ask Layla, and then I'm going to put the same question to Rachel. So what do you think is the biggest opportunity?
I think it's about having, and so one of the comments by Luke, thank you, about having a productive conversation without being nosy to find out how you can support someone in their role. So what do you need? What do you have right now? Is that sufficient? What might you need? I'm going to go look for the answer, building on Janice's point, to see what we can do to make your working at home life balance as productive, and do what we can do. I think also it's about this, I think there is opportunities as well to shift this now culture. I think it's kind of gotten worse working at home, but why does everything have to happen now? Why do we need everything yesterday? Some things you might need urgently, but again, it goes back to communication. So that opportunity about, how do you like to communicate? This is my preference, this is your preference. What can I do to make things better for you? Have you got enough information? We do actually have a lot in our workplace, or we don't have it in-house, but I know some third sector organizations that could support you. You know, so to just get to know your staff better on a personal basis without putting private into the public or having to reveal things that you don't feel comfortable doing, but to ensure that you're supporting them, again, colleague to colleague, manager to team member, and organization to all employees. And also, if there's an organization with board level, that the board needs to know actually around, what are you doing and what could we do better? Because again, boards play a really important part in this, and they might have connections and they might have ways of doing things better that benefit the entire organization.
Definitely. Rachel, have you got anything to add to that? What do you think is the single biggest opportunities for employers right now, and how can we take advantage of it?
Well, I think going back to what I said at the beginning, we've got one of the opportunities is that we've been forced into this new way of working, and in some ways it's diminished a lot of the risk because everybody's doing it. We don't have to be at the forefront. We can be going along as a group, which feels a lot safer. And I think for me, from a neurodiverse perspective, looking at this more inclusive hiring that people are starting to think about now, reducing things like the traditional send in your CV and have an interview process, that is obviously getting more neurodiverse people into the workplace, which means neurodiverse people are more productive, 30 to 50% according to Harvard Business Review and JP Morgan Chase. And the benefits of having people like me in your workplace extend out to everybody. So you've got, you're offering the autistic person flexible working, the person with an elderly parent or grandparent is benefiting, the working parent is benefiting. You offer the screen reading software to a dyslexic, and then of course it's there when you hire a blind person. So you've got all these benefits. And one of the things about neuro-inclusive hiring is that it reduces other biases as well. So it reduces things like racial bias and gender bias. And I think all of us here know that every kind of bias that you reduce in the workplace means you're a more productive and successful workplace. I mean, there's study after study after study that shows, the more diverse your workplace is, the more innovative you are, the better you're working, and ultimately, the more money you make.
Yeah, definitely. Like the business case is so clear that it sort of shocks me that we're still kind of having this conversation, because we should be doing it because it's absolutely the right thing to do. But also the business case is really clear. You will build better products if you have a more diverse workforce. You will make more money if you have a more diverse workforce. There are like countless studies in that, and yet here we are still having this conversation. It's really frustrating, and I would love to know kind of how to, and maybe this is the moment where the world kind of realizes, actually, we it is the right thing to do, and therefore we're going to do it. And maybe, I don't know, it's just, I don't know, maybe now is the time. I hope that it is. I've got a question here from Stephanie. They say, what are the main blockers you see in recruiting, starting from the job ads, and how can we improve on this? I'm going to go to Rachel for this first, if that's okay, Rachel, because I think that's a really interesting question to appeal to neurodiverse audience and candidates.
Yes, thank you. Hi, Stephanie. Thank you for the question. So you're asking me, what are the main blockers in...
What are the main blockers you see in recruiting, starting from job adverts, and what do you suggest we can do to improve on those like traditional kind of ways of recruiting?
Well, I think it obviously depends on the neurodiverse person or the person with mental health issues. And by the way, those often go together. They're not the same thing. Neurodiversity is different from mental health issues, but you find a lot of neurodiverse people have depression and anxiety. So to give a basic example, if you have a job description and it says send in your CV and you've got to have good attention to detail and everything, that's already, it's putting off a dyslexic person. It's going to take them more time to apply, and they might have a lot of jobs to apply to. And it's also telling them that they know that if their CV is not perfect, or if their attention to detail is not that good, then they're going to fail at the first hurdle. And also it might not be relevant to the job. They might not need it. It might not be part of their role, and they might be perfect for the job. A lot of dyslexics, for example, are very good at visual and spatial sort of tasks where you don't need that detail. So that's one thing. Job interviews are quite difficult for a lot of people. Autistic people quite often find the job interview very difficult because we don't know how to behave. We mask a lot. It's very stressful, actually. And I think all of us, me included, tend to underestimate the level of stress that it's a job interview is stressful already, but when you have to go in pretending to be someone else, which is what we do to get through the interview, to get that job, it's even harder. And what people are starting to do now is skills-based placement. So instead of going through all this, you just go on a placement in the workplace. They do some screening to make sure that you might have the right skills for the job, and then you do a placement instead. And people who are doing it are finding it more cost effective than the job interview, because job interviews, everyone who's working there takes so much time to interview people, and the placement, you can tell if they're going to do the job, if they're going to work well with the team, and all of these things. And there's an organization in America, Neurodiversity in the Workplace, I think they're called. They organize these skills-based projects for their clients, and their retention rate for neurodiverse people is 98% over 5 years.
Wow.
Which is phenomenal.
Yeah.
So they're proving that it works.
Yeah, that's amazing. Are there organisations in the UK kind of like that, or that you know of?
There are individual companies who use this process. There are, as far as I know, I can't think of anyone off the top of my head who does this. It tends to be company by company, and the ones that you find doing these specific neurodiverse hiring programs tend to be the big tech companies at the moment. Obviously, I'm thinking that it's probably going to be something that spreads more and more. But again, it's throwing out that rule book that I talked about earlier, that 100-year-old rule book on how to work. People have got to be brave enough to actually do that, and I don't think we're quite there yet.
No, I think you're absolutely right, that we're just so programmed to send in a CV, read the CV, and then, with all the bias that is like entrenched in like how we write CVs, or, what we think when we read someone's name at the top of a CV, and, that bias can get in the way and stop someone from moving to the next level. And it is so entrenched, isn't it? And we definitely need to be brave and recognize that in being brave, we're going to get a better result in the end. Layla, I don't know whether you've got anything to add to what Rachel was saying there about blockers to recruiting.
I think it's also about partnering with specific organisations. So, Rachel mentioned placements. I think that's really important. There is a comment here, though, about from in the chat just about they're hiring white male autistics, unfortunately, the big tech companies. So thinking again about the bigger picture, yes, we want diversity, but all the different intersectional things that come together. I think it is about partnering with certain organisations. So it could be Women in Tech, that's run by Maggie Berry. It could be the Black Tech Network. It could be National Autistic Society. It could be working with Rachel and what she does, working with Janice and what she does. So how you can build those partnerships and using things like genuine occupational requirement, proportionate means to a legitimate aim, thinking about all those things. So creating positive action initiatives, which some people love, some people really dislike, but also how you present that and your reason for why. And it doesn't mean that you're just getting people in because they fit the bill. It's, again, it goes back to that point about strategy, like you would with training. What do we need? And is the message that we have jobs? Is the message that you are very welcome to work here? Is it being promulgated in the right way? Are we spreading it as widely as we can? And I think by having a partnership, that's what you're doing. And you've also then got another set of eyes to look over any language that you're so in it that you might not be able to see, or appealing to certain groups of people through the layout, through the design, through where you advertise those jobs as well.
Definitely. And I think I'm going to harp on about data again, but it's great if you do all those things at the front end and then you achieve getting more diverse people into your team, but it doesn't stop there. It's are you making the actual environment good enough for them to work and thrive in, or are you just kind of getting them in and then they're leaving 6 months, 12 months later, because actually you've looked at the hiring process, but you haven't looked at like what the actual working environment is like. And so understanding and measuring attrition rates and unpicking why those are the way that they are as well, and using the data that we have to really transform things, I think. Janice, I don't know whether you have anything to add to that at all.
Not much different to what both Layla and Rachel have said, but I just want to pick up one thing Rachel said about when we attend interviews being somebody else. You know, we have a long way to go. The fact we have to be somebody else in this whole process. I think once we feel that we can bring our whole self, and authenticity is almost a buzzword, but to be honest, that's how you get the best out of people. And like that was suggested, I've also done, sometimes look, here in the Caribbean, people will write very lofty CVs because they believe that what needs to be presented. And it's pretty obvious that the person in front of you didn't write the CV when you get to them. So having them do the on-placement stuff, but you talk to them and you can see something, you're trusting your gut as a leader, you're trusting your gut, and having that placement and been able to accommodate that just for a couple of hours even to see how they work and get with work with the team is a dividend, because retention is far too expensive trying to recruit people. Far too expensive.
Definitely, definitely. I'm going to draw our discussion to a close. It's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much to Rachel, Layla and Janice for joining me today. Everyone is on LinkedIn, so I know that everyone will be really open to sort of answering more questions or continuing the discussion over on LinkedIn if you have any further questions for our panelists. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I hope you have a good rest of the week and a good run up to Christmas. Take care, everyone.